The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote that anxiety is the price we pay for the freedom to think. For those who live eternally inside their own minds, this anxiety manifests in an even crueler way when it comes to love. There's a type of person for whom loving isn't simply about feeling, but about understanding, deconstructing, and questioning every aspect of the relationship until it loses all of its original magic. You recognize this pattern because you live it every single day. While everyone around you seems to dance easily through their love lives, you remain paralyzed inside your own head, analyzing every gesture until love becomes an impossible puzzle to solve. It's not a lack of feeling, it's quite the opposite. You feel too much, think too much, and perceive too much. This video doesn't bring magical solutions or ready-made formulas. It's about understanding why your mind works this way, and why that doesn't make you defective, just different. We're going to dive deep into the reasons why love seems impossible for those who think profoundly. And maybe, by the end, you'll feel less alone on this journey. The first thing you need to understand is that your excessive awareness isn't a superpower. It's a curse disguised as a gift. While most people experience love with a certain lightness, accepting things as they are, you can't. Every smile is analyzed for hidden intentions. Every message is dissected to find the concealed meaning. Every moment of silence becomes a puzzle that needs to be solved. You're not being paranoid. Your mind simply doesn't know how to function any other way. It's been trained to question, to search for patterns, to not accept things at face value. And when you apply this to love, you transform something that should be natural into an exhausting scientific experiment. The problem is that love doesn't follow the scientific method. It's chaotic, contradictory, and often irrational. And the more you try to fit it into logic, the more it slips through your fingers. You end up creating theories about the relationship instead of living it. You build hypotheses about the future instead of enjoying the present. And in the end, you're so tired from thinking that there's no energy left to feel. This constant vigilance drains all spontaneity from the relationship. You're never fully present because part of your mind is always observing, noting, filing away every detail. It's like watching a movie with part of you sitting in the audience and another part behind the cameras, analyzing each scene. There's never complete surrender because you're always monitoring yourself and the other person. And this is exhausting not just for you, but for whoever is by your side. People feel when they're being analyzed instead of loved. They sense the weight of your critical gaze even when you try to hide it. And eventually, they get tired of living under a microscope. This excess of awareness comes accompanied by a paralyzing fear that defines your entire romantic experience. The terror of deluding yourself. You know this feeling well. It's that voice in your head that constantly asks whether what you're feeling is real or just a projection of your desires. You question whether you're truly loving the person or just the idealized version you've constructed in your mind. And the more you think about it, the less certain you become. This fear doesn't come out of nowhere. It's born from your ability to see beyond appearances, to realize that much of what we call love is actually shared fantasy. You know that people project their needs onto others and call it connection. You know that many relationships are built on comfortable misunderstandings. And precisely because you know this, you live in fear of making the same mistake. This lucidity should protect you, but in practice, it paralyzes you. Because if you're never certain the feeling is real, how can you surrender to it? The result is a kind of permanent wariness. You never dive in head first because you always keep part of yourself on the shore, watching. You're always ready to pull back at the first sign that you might be deceiving yourself. And ironically, this protection you've created against illusion ends up becoming the illusion itself. You delude yourself into thinking you can have absolute certainty about something as uncertain as love. You seek guarantees in territory where they don't exist. And while you wait for certainty that never comes, you lose the opportunity to experience something that could be real, even if imperfect. But perhaps the biggest obstacle isn't the excessive analysis or the fear of illusion. It's something more basic and painful. You simply can't adapt to the shallow love that most people consider sufficient. For you, those conversations about the weather, about work, about trending shows, are torture disguised as socialization. You need depth. You need to talk about fears, dreams, internal contradictions, and existential questions. You need real vulnerability, not that performative version people show on social media. And when you meet someone and realize the conversation won't go beyond the superficial, something inside you gives up immediately. It's not arrogance or being picky. It's a genuine need for real connection that your brain demands in order to consider someone worthy of your time and feelings. The problem is that this kind of depth scares most people. They're not prepared for intense conversations right from the start. They don't want to talk about their wounds and insecurities on the first dates. They prefer the social dance of normal relationships, where you reveal layers gradually, following an unwritten script that everyone seems to know except you. But you don't have patience for that. Your mind operates at high speed and wants to get straight to what matters. You want to skip the empty phases and go directly to the person's essence. And when you realize that's not going to happen, you completely lose interest. You can't fake enthusiasm for something you consider empty. And so, you go on eliminating person after person, not because they're bad, but because they can't reach you at the level of depth you need. This relentless search for depth is directly linked to your idealism. And here lies one of the biggest saboteurs of your love life. You don't want just any love, you want perfect love. The kind you read about in books, saw in movies that truly touched you, imagined in your solitary reflections. You've created a standard in your head based on all your readings about philosophy, psychology, and literature. A love that's simultaneously passion and friendship, depth and lightness, freedom and commitment, intensity and peace. A love that completes you without erasing you, that challenges you without hurting you, that understands you without you having to explain. Basically, you want something that doesn't exist in the imperfect reality of human relationships. And the worst part is that you know this. Your awareness tells you that you're being too idealistic, that you're creating impossible expectations. But even knowing this, you can't lower your standards, because doing so would feel like a betrayal of yourself, a surrender to the mediocrity you've always despised. So you keep waiting, searching, analyzing every new person who appears in your life, looking for signs of that perfect connection. And obviously, you never find it. Because you're looking for something that only exists in your imagination. Every real person you meet comes with flaws, contradictions, limitations, and baggage that don't fit your ideal. And instead of accepting this as part of the human experience, you get disappointed. You see every imperfection as proof that this isn't the right person. And you move on, toward a search that has no end. This idealism isn't just about the other person. It's also about yourself within the relationship. You're afraid that love will transform you into someone you don't recognize. You've seen this happen with friends and acquaintances. People who were interesting and full of life, who after entering a relationship, seem to have lost something essential. And you're terrified of this happening to you. Your identity was built very carefully over the years. Your ideas, your tastes, your way of seeing the world, all of this is the result of much reflection and self-discovery. And the idea that someone could enter your life and mess up this construction is terrifying. You don't want to be one of those people who change personalities depending on who they're dating. You don't want to lose your interests, your friends, your essence because of a relationship. So you protect yourself. You maintain emotional distance even when you're physically close. You create invisible barriers that prevent anyone from getting too close to your core. You're always ready to defend your individuality at the slightest sign of invasion. But real relationships require some level of mixing, of mutual influence, of change. It's not possible to love someone deeply and remain exactly the same person. And here's the paradox. You want intimacy, but you reject the transformations that intimacy necessarily brings. You want someone to know you completely, but you don't want to risk that this knowledge will change who you are. And in the end, you're stuck in this impasse, unable to surrender, because surrendering means somehow losing control over yourself. Over time, you start to make peace with loneliness. Not because you want to, but because it's what you know best. In loneliness, you don't need to explain why you think that way or why you act a certain way. You don't need to apologize for being too intense or too complicated. You don't need to adapt to another person's rhythm or negotiate emotional space. There, alone, you're free to be exactly who you are, without judgments or expectations. And this becomes comfortable in a dangerous way. Because the more time you spend in this loneliness, the harder it becomes to leave it. You get used to the silence of your own company. You learn to fill your days with books, movies, personal projects, and solitary reflections. And eventually, The idea of including another person in this routine starts to seem more like an invasion than a welcome addition. Loneliness becomes your comfort zone, because there you have total control. There are no unpleasant surprises, no disappointments, no risk of being abandoned or betrayed. You know exactly what to expect from each day. And for someone who lives with so much noise in their head, this predictability is a relief. Love, on the other hand, is chaos. It's constant unpredictability. It's waking up not knowing whether the person will be in a good mood or not. It's dealing with conflicts that come out of nowhere. It's navigating another person's emotions in addition to your own. And all of this seems too exhausting when compared to the peace you find alone. So you choose loneliness, not because you don't want love, but because the emotional price of love seems too high to pay. But there's another problem that constantly haunts you. Even in moments when you manage to relax a bit and just enjoy someone's company, your mind doesn't turn off. It's impossible for you to simply feel without thinking. You can't experience a romantic moment without analyzing it. You can't accept a declaration of love without questioning the motivations behind it. Your mind is always on, always processing, always seeking to understand the why of everything. And this steals the magic from moments that should be special. When someone tells you they love you, instead of simply being happy, you wonder what exactly the person means by that. Love in the romantic sense? In the sense of attachment, of admiration, of need? You dissect the word until it loses any emotional meaning. When someone hugs you, you're thinking about the meaning of the gesture instead of feeling the warmth of the embrace. When someone kisses you, you're analyzing the technique, the intensity, what it says about the state of the relationship, instead of losing yourself in the moment. This inability to turn off the critical mind destroys the spontaneity that love needs to flourish. Because love isn't something you understand, it's something you live. It's not a concept to be analyzed, it's an experience to be felt. But for you, everything needs to pass through the filter of reason before reaching the heart. And when it finally arrives, it's already so processed, so deconstructed, that it's lost all of its original intensity. This way of functioning also affects how you present yourself to others. You simply can't play the social games that most people play at the beginning of relationships. You can't pretend you're less interested than you are. You can't use seduction techniques or play hard to get. All of that seems fake and manipulative to you. You value authenticity above all else and expect the same from others. You want people to be direct, honest, and real from the very first moment. And when you realize someone is wearing social masks or following conquest scripts, you completely lose respect for that person. But the problem is that these social dances exist for a reason. They serve as protection, as a way to test the waters before exposing yourself completely. And most people aren't prepared for the level of brutal honesty you offer right off the bat. You show up talking about your insecurities, your fears, your failures, thinking that's building intimacy. But for many, that's simply too much information, too fast. They don't know how to deal with so much emotional weight on the first dates. They expected lightness and encountered depth. They expected fun and encountered intensity. And although some might find this interesting at first, most end up getting scared and pulling away. Not because you're bad or wrong, but because you're operating on a different frequency. You want real intimacy, while they're still in the phase of deciding if they even like your company. And this difference in timing creates a mismatch that rarely gets resolved. Perhaps the most frustrating part of all this is that you see too far ahead. Your analytical mind has this irritating ability to project the future based on patterns of the present. So you're on the second date with someone, and you're already seeing the problems that will arise 6 months from now. You notice the fundamental incompatibilities that haven't manifested yet, but that you know will appear. You identify the differences in values, in life goals, in ways of dealing with conflicts. And with all this clairvoyance, you feel obligated to end something that hasn't even properly begun. Because for you, it doesn't make sense to invest time and emotion in something you already know won't work out. But here's the problem. You might be right about future problems, but you're taking away from yourself the chance to be wrong. You're eliminating the possibility that things could develop in ways you didn't predict. You're underestimating people's capacity to grow and change, including yourself. Your analysis of the future is based on who you both are now, but it completely ignores who you could become together. And so, you sabotage relationships that could have worked out, not because they were bad, but because you decided they would be bad before even giving them a real chance. You live so worried about the ending that you never get to enjoy the beginning. This way of functioning creates an abyss between you and most people. Because while you're thinking about all these layers of complexity, most people are just living. They don't spend hours reflecting on the meaning of each interaction. They don't constantly question whether they're loving the right way. They simply feel something and move forward with it. And when you try to explain to these people why you need to analyze everything, they don't understand. To them, you're complicating something that should be simple. You're creating problems where none exist. You're thinking too much instead of feeling. And in a way, they're right. But you can't change the way your mind works just because it would be more convenient. This mutual misunderstanding manifests in painful ways. The person who's with you doesn't understand why you need so much time alone to process your emotions. They don't understand why you question everything instead of simply accepting. They don't understand why a simple argument turns into a deep analysis about the nature of the relationship. And you, in turn, don't understand how they can be so superficial, how they can be satisfied with simple answers to complex questions, how they can ignore all the contradictions and move forward as if nothing mattered. And neither of you is wrong. They're just different ways of existing in the world. But these differences create a distance that often can't be crossed. You start to feel like you're always explaining yourself, justifying why you need space, defending your need for silence, translating your thoughts into a language the other person can understand. And this is exhausting. Because deep down, you just wanted someone who understood you without needing translation, someone who spoke your emotional language natively, someone you wouldn't need to explain yourself to because they would simply get it. But these people are rare, and while you don't find that person, you remain stuck in this cycle of trying to make yourself understood and failing repeatedly. And this exhaustion leads you to another problem. Relationships start to seem like a threat to your mental freedom. You value your reflection time above almost everything. Those hours alone where you can think, read, process your ideas without interruption. That's your way of staying sane in a chaotic world. But relationships demand presence. They demand that you be available emotionally and physically. They demand that you participate in activities you might not feel like doing. They demand that you divide your energy between your needs and the other person's needs. And for you, this feels like a prison. No matter how much you like the person, the feeling of having to account for your time, of not being able to simply disappear for a few days to recharge, of needing to consider another person in every decision, all of this weighs on you. You start to feel like you're losing yourself, not because the person is bad, but because the structure of a relationship is incompatible with how you function best. And here's another paradox. You want companionship, but you don't want to give up your solitude. You want intimacy, but you don't want to lose your independence. You want someone to know you deeply, but you don't want to have to report your movements. And these internal contradictions keep you trapped, unable to surrender completely, because surrendering means sacrificing part of the freedom you consider essential to your mental health. As you mature in this conscious solitude, you start to see through the romantic narratives that society sells. You realize that much of what we call love is actually codependency, that many relationships are driven by fear of loneliness and not by genuine connection, that people settle for emotional crumbs because they've been taught that anything is better than being alone, and you refuse to be part of that. You see couples around you living lives that seem more like obligation than choice. You see people who gave up dreams for a relationship that doesn't even make them happy. You see the social performance of perfect love on social media, while knowing that behind the photos there's emptiness. This disillusionment with romantic standards makes you skeptical. You can no longer get excited about the things that excite most people. You don't see the point in dating anniversaries or mandatory celebrations. You're not impressed by cliché romantic gestures that seem copied from bad movies. You want something real, not a performance of love. You want genuine connection, not a facade relationship to show others. But when you express this, people think you're bitter or disillusioned. They say you're too complicated, that you expect too much, that you need to be more realistic. And maybe they're right on some points. But you can't force enthusiasm for something that doesn't move you. You can't pretend you're satisfied with the kind of love that satisfies others. All this constant analysis comes from a deep need to find meaning in everything, including love. For you, it's not enough to feel. You need to understand why you feel. It's not enough to be in a relationship. You need to know what its purpose is. where it's going, what it means in the larger context of your life. You need love to make sense within the narrative you've built about yourself and about the world. And when it doesn't, you can't surrender to it. This search for meaning is both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it protects you from empty and purposeless relationships. On the other, it prevents you from simply living experiences that might not have a clear meaning now, but that could have value in other ways. You're always trying to fit love into a larger framework, trying to understand how it relates to your life goals, to your journey of self-discovery, to your ambitions and fears. And many times, love doesn't fit perfectly. It messes up your plans. It pulls you in directions you hadn't foreseen. And instead of accepting this as part of the experience, you resist. You try to force love to make sense when it is, by nature, something that defies logic. And in this resistance, you lose the opportunity to let love transform you in ways you can't predict or control. But perhaps the hardest part of all this is the vulnerability that love requires. You've spent your entire life building defenses, using your intelligence as a shield, your analytical capacity as armor, your skepticism as protection. And all of this kept you safe. It protected you from pain and disappointment that you saw other people suffer. But to truly love, you need to lower these defenses. You need to open yourself to the possibility of being hurt. You need to trust that the other person won't use their knowledge about you against you. And this is terrifying, because you know too much about how cruel people can be. You know too much about emotional manipulation, about psychological games, about the subtle ways someone can hurt you. And with all this knowledge, opening up seems like emotional suicide. So you remain closed off. You show only parts of yourself, never the whole. You reveal some vulnerabilities, but keep the deepest ones hidden. You allow someone to get close, but never too close. And you live with this constant fear that if you open up completely, you'll be destroyed. This fear isn't irrational. It's based on real observations about how the world works. But it also keeps you trapped in a lonely fortress where you're safe, but also profoundly alone. And the irony is that the kind of love you seek, that deep and genuine connection, is only possible through the vulnerability you fear so much. The truth is that you get tired. Tired of always having to explain your way of loving, of feeling, of processing emotions. Tired of being called complicated, intense, difficult. Tired of seeing people give up on you because they don't have the patience to understand your complexity. And eventually, you stop trying. You stop explaining yourself because you realize that whoever needs an explanation will never truly understand. You start to accept that your way of loving is different, and that this will drastically limit your options. And there's a certain peace in this acceptance, even if it's a melancholic peace. You stop forcing yourself to fit into relationships that don't fit you. You stop trying to be simpler, lighter, easier. But this exhaustion also closes you off. You start giving up before even trying, because you already know how the story ends. You already know the script. You'll get interested in someone. You'll start opening up. You'll realize the person can't accompany you to the depth you need. You'll try to adapt. You'll fail. You'll feel misunderstood. And you'll eventually give up. And since you've lived this several times, you prefer to save energy and not even start. This preventive protection keeps you safe, but it also keeps you stagnant. It prevents you from discovering if this time could be different. It steals from you the possibility of finding someone who maybe, just maybe, could understand you. What you're really searching for deep down is a reciprocity that goes beyond the emotional. You want someone who understands you not just sentimentally, but intellectually. Someone with whom you can discuss complex ideas without having to simplify everything. Someone who challenges your perspectives and makes you think in new ways. Someone whose mind is as interesting as their heart. And this combination is extremely rare. Most people either offer you emotional connection without intellectual depth, or mental stimulation without emotional intimacy. But you want both. You want a partnership that's of both the heart and the mind. And while you don't find this, nothing else seems sufficient. You've already tried to settle for less. You've dated people who were nice, but with whom you couldn't have conversations that truly moved you. You've gotten involved with people who understood you emotionally, but who couldn't keep up with your pace of thinking. And there was always a feeling of incompleteness left over. As if you were divided between two worlds and no person could inhabit both. And this frustration leads you back to loneliness, Because at least there you don't have to choose between feeding your mind or your heart. You can do both alone, even if incompletely. Along this solitary path, you start to realize that maybe the problem isn't finding the right person, but accepting that your way of loving will always be different. That maybe you'll never experience that lightness that other people have. That your relationships will always come accompanied by questioning, analysis, and a certain melancholy of someone who sees too much. And there's a strange freedom in this acceptance. When you stop fighting against your nature and simply accept it, something changes. You're no longer trying to fit into a mold that wasn't made for you. You're no longer blaming yourself for being too complicated or for thinking too much. You understand that recognizing this difficulty isn't defeat, but liberating self-knowledge. Deep thinkers can learn to love differently, respecting their nature without forcing themselves into patterns that don't serve them. Love can be possible when it stops being a prison and becomes a conscious choice, not blind surrender. Maybe you'll never have that impulsive and carefree love you see in others. But you can have something deeper, more conscious, more aligned with who you truly are. A love that accepts your contradictions, that doesn't demand you turn off your mind, that understands that for you, thinking and feeling aren't separate actions. What did you think of this reflection? Leave your comment down below, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me for the next video.